Let's be honest, being an INFJ isn't easy. You feel things deeply, think about everything way too much, and just want to make the world a little better. But somehow, it feels like people often misunderstand you. They say you're too intense, too quiet, too emotional, too distant. The list goes on. And it's frustrating because your intentions are usually pure. You care, you try, yet the criticism still shows up. This video isn't here to tell you what's wrong with you. It's here to show you why you, as an INFJ, often receive more criticism than others. And it's not because you're doing something wrong. In fact, it's usually the opposite. Your personality runs deep. It challenges people, it makes them reflect, and sometimes it makes them uncomfortable. But understanding the reasons behind this criticism can help you stop carrying it all on your shoulders. So let's break down the 6 big reasons INFJs tend to be magnets for criticism, and why it's not a flaw, but often a reflection of how complex and rare you really are. Reason 1. High sensitivity to criticism. INFJs feel things on a deeper level than most people. When someone criticizes you, even lightly, it doesn't just bounce off, it hits you in a way that lingers. It might replay in your head for hours, maybe even days. That's because as an INFJ, your emotional radar is always on. You notice tone, choice of words, even body language. So when someone gives you feedback, it often feels like they're criticizing not just your actions, but your whole self. This kind of sensitivity comes from a mix of emotional empathy and deep thinking. You're always trying to understand others, feel what they feel, and make sense of your world on a very personal level. But because of that, criticism doesn't feel like a neutral fact. It feels like rejection. You might question yourself, even when the other person didn't mean anything harsh. It's also why you might overthink small comments. A coworker might say, "You could have spoken up more in that meeting," and you'll start wondering if they think you're weak or not smart or just awkward. That spiral can be exhausting. Now here's the thing, being sensitive isn't a bad thing. It means you're emotionally aware and in tune with people. But it also means you carry weight that others don't even realize they're putting on you. Most people can shake off criticism, they don't analyze it. INFJs do. Because of this, even constructive feedback can feel like a hit to your identity. That's why people might say you overreact or take things too personally. But really, it's because you process deeply. You don't just hear words, you feel the meaning behind them. Unfortunately, that reaction can make you an easy target. People might sense your emotional nature and think you're too soft or sensitive. In some cases, they use that as a reason to push harder or speak more bluntly. It's unfair, but it happens. You also try so hard to do the right thing and avoid hurting others. So when someone points out a mistake or flaw, it cuts deeper. Your goal is usually harmony, not conflict. And criticism feels like the opposite of harmony. It feels like you're failing someone. Knowing this doesn't make it stop, but it helps you understand why it hurts more than it should. You're not broken. You're just wired to feel, and that's not something to be ashamed of. Reason 2. Perfectionist tendencies. INFJs often set extremely high standards for themselves. You want things to be meaningful, well thought out, and done the right way, even if no one else notices the effort. This inner drive to be perfect isn't about showing off. It's about living up to your own ideals. But this can also backfire. The pressure you put on yourself makes you more sensitive to any sign that you've fallen short. And when someone criticizes you, it confirms your deepest fear, that you're not enough. Even before anyone says anything, you're usually already judging yourself. You review your choices, question your words, and replay moments where you think you could have done better. So when someone else points out a flaw, even in a polite way, it can feel like a heavy blow. It's not just about that one mistake. It's about not being who you hoped you would be. This perfectionism also affects how you see others. You often expect them to try as hard as you do. But when they don't, and then criticize you on top of it, it feels unfair. You think, "I'm trying so hard, why don't they see that?" And here's another thing. INFJs don't usually brag or show off. You tend to be quiet about your efforts. So when you're criticized, it feels extra painful because the hard work you put in often goes unseen. You're not just being told something went wrong, you're being told that all your effort wasn't enough. What makes this even harder is that INFJs usually don't like calling people out or explaining themselves. You want your work, your care, and your intentions to speak for themselves. But not everyone sees that, and in some environments, like workplaces or even families, that silence can be misunderstood as weakness or passivity. So when something goes wrong, people might wrongly assume you weren't trying hard enough. And because you hold yourself to such high standards, criticism can lead to burnout. You push harder, try more, lose sleep, and then still feel like you're not measuring up. This cycle creates stress, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. And instead of pushing back or setting boundaries, INFJs often try to fix themselves, even when they're not the problem. The truth is, no one is perfect, not even close. But INFJs often feel like they have to be, just to feel worthy or safe. And that makes them very sensitive to outside feedback, even when it's well-meaning. Criticism hurts more when you're already carrying the weight of perfection. When you're already tired from trying to do everything right, one small comment can feel like proof that you're failing. But remember, striving for growth is great. Expecting perfection isn't. Reason 3. Conflict avoidance. INFJs usually want peace, not fights. You avoid conflict whenever you can, not because you're weak, but because emotional tension drains you. Arguments, loud debates, or even minor confrontations feel heavy. You'd rather stay quiet or walk away than get pulled into a shouting match. But here's the problem. When you don't speak up, people assume you agree. And when things go wrong, they might put the blame on you. Because you don't always defend yourself in the moment, criticism tends to pile up. People may think, well, they didn't say anything, so it must be true. That silence gets misread. Your calm nature makes it easy for others to project their own assumptions onto you. And over time, that leads to criticism that's based on misunderstandings, not reality. Conflict avoidance also means you bottle up a lot. You keep things inside to keep the peace, but the more you hold in, the more pressure builds. Then one day, something small sets it off. You explode or shut down completely, and people say, "Where did that come from?" They don't see the months of quiet frustration leading up to it. Also, because you avoid conflict, you may let people get away with bad behavior for too long. You forgive, you explain it away, you give second chances. But when people see you won't fight back, some take advantage of that. They criticize you more freely, knowing you won't argue. Or worse, they think you don't value yourself enough to stand up. You might think staying out of conflict keeps things stable, but it often does the opposite. It builds resentment. You end up holding pain that should have been shared. And when criticism finally does come, it feels 10 times worse, because it's hitting a nerve that's already raw. Learning to face conflict doesn't mean becoming aggressive. It means setting limits. It means calmly saying, "That's not okay," or "I disagree." Small steps like this show people you respect yourself and that you won't carry everyone's blame. Being peaceful is a strength, but when it comes at the cost of your voice, criticism can start to define you. Speaking up isn't selfish, it's protection. And for INFJs, learning to do that can change everything. Reason 4. High expectations of others. INFJs see people not just as they are, but as they could be. You have a gift for spotting potential. You look past the surface and often imagine how someone might grow, change, or become their best self. This can be inspiring, but it can also lead to problems, especially when people don't live up to the picture you've created in your mind. When someone you care about doesn't try, cuts corners, or acts selfishly, it can really bother you. You may not always say it out loud, but inside, it feels like a letdown. You hold yourself to high standards and often expect others to do the same. When they don't, that silent judgment can come through, even if you're trying to hide it. And people feel that. They sense when they're being measured or held to expectations they didn't sign up for. Some may react with defensiveness. Others may get angry and criticize you in return. They might say you're too demanding, too idealistic, or never satisfied. But from your side, it's not about control. It's about believing in people and wanting the best for them. This mismatch can lead to a lot of tension in relationships. Friends, partners, or co-workers may feel like they're constantly being evaluated. They may not understand that your intentions come from a place of care, not judgment. And when they push back, you may end up receiving harsh criticism, even though your heart was in the right place. It can also go the other way. When someone doesn't meet your inner standards and then criticizes you, it feels especially unfair. You think, I'm trying so hard to help and be patient. Why am I the one being blamed? This emotional conflict creates confusion and resentment on both sides. Another tough truth: sometimes your vision of who someone could be isn't who they want to be, and trying to nudge them toward growth can feel like pressure, even if that's not your goal. When they resist, they might criticize you for expecting too much or trying to change them. To protect yourself, it's important to remember that not everyone sees the world the way you do. Not everyone wants to grow or be deeply understood, and that's okay. Letting go of some expectations can save you from a lot of disappointment and reduce the criticism that follows. Holding high standards isn't wrong, but making space for people to be imperfect, just like you, can lead to more peace and fewer arguments. Reason 5: difficulty handling negative emotions. INFJs often carry a storm of emotions under a calm surface. You feel deeply, but you don't always know how to let those feelings out. You might smile when you're sad, stay quiet when you're hurt, or act strong when you're struggling. Over time, this emotional hiding act takes a toll, and it makes criticism feel a lot heavier than it should. When someone says something harsh, your first reaction may not even show. On the outside, you might nod or stay polite, but inside, your brain is racing. You're replaying their words, analyzing their tone, wondering what they really meant. And because you're not letting those feelings out, they build up. One small comment can open the door to weeks of self-doubt, frustration, or quiet anger. Part of the problem is that INFJs often feel responsible for other people's emotions. You don't want to make things worse. So instead of saying, "That hurt me," you hold it in. Instead of crying in front of someone, you wait until you're alone. This emotional control helps you survive, but it also makes it harder to deal with criticism in a healthy way. You may also fear being too much, too emotional, too dramatic, too sensitive. So you hide how you really feel, hoping people will just understand. But they usually don't. They might think you're fine when you're not. Or worse, they keep pushing, not realizing how much it's affecting you. And because you don't often express anger or frustration openly, you may not set clear emotional boundaries. That means people don't always know when they've gone too far. They criticize you, and instead of correcting them or pushing back, you absorb it. It becomes part of your self-image. Over time, this creates a dangerous cycle. You get hurt, stay silent, and then feel even worse because no one sees how much you're hurting. You may even start to believe the criticism is true, just because no one challenged it, not even you. The truth is, handling negative emotions doesn't mean pretending they're not there. It means finding safe ways to express them, talking to someone you trust, writing things down, setting boundaries. It's not weakness to feel hurt, and it's not wrong to say, "That wasn't okay." When you learn to face those feelings instead of hiding them, criticism loses its power. It no longer controls your self-worth, and little by little, you stop seeing yourself through the lens of others and start seeing yourself with more compassion. Reason 6: misunderstood intentions. INFJs are deep thinkers with layered emotions and complex motives. You don't just act, you reflect, plan, feel, and often operate from a place of meaning. But because so much of that process happens internally, other people don't always see your full intentions. And when people can't understand something, they tend to fill in the gaps, often in the wrong way. For example, you might make a quiet decision based on long thought and personal values. But to someone else, that silence might look like disapproval or passive aggression. You're not trying to be cold or distant, but they may interpret it that way. And when they don't understand your true motive, they criticize what they think you meant. This happens a lot in social settings or group situations. INFJs might stay quiet in a meeting, not because they don't care, but because they're processing. Or they might pull away from a friend, not out of anger, but to recharge emotionally. Still, people may say, "You're being distant," or "You're too hard to read." And instead of asking you directly, they label your behavior and criticize it. It's painful, especially when your heart was in the right place. You care deeply about people and outcomes. So being misunderstood feels like failure. You think, if they only knew why I did that, they wouldn't be saying this. But explaining yourself all the time is tiring. And even then, not everyone wants to understand. This creates a constant internal battle. Do you explain yourself and risk being seen as too much? Or do you stay quiet and keep being misunderstood? Neither feels good. And both can lead to criticism that doesn't match who you really are. Another layer. INFJs often play the long game. You might have a quiet plan for helping someone, building trust, or making a situation better. But when others don't see fast results, they question your methods or your commitment. Again, the depth of your approach becomes a reason for doubt. What helps is learning how to share small parts of your thought process bit by bit. You don't have to open every emotional door, but giving others small windows into your why can stop a lot of the misreading. At the end of the day, not everyone will get you. That's okay. The ones who matter will learn to ask, not assume. And those who keep misunderstanding, well, their criticism says more about them than about you. So, why do INFJs get so much criticism? It's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because you're doing something real. You live with depth. You care with intensity. And in a world that often stays on the surface, that can make people uncomfortable. But now you know the reasons behind the pain. And that knowledge, it's power. You don't have to carry every comment like a weight. Some critiques aren't about you. They're about fear, misunderstanding, or projection. Keep being you. Keep growing. And remember, being misunderstood doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're rare.